Do you all have favorite writers, not among those here? We assume these are all your favorites as well.
Of horror?
Yeah, you think there are masters that should...
Well, I always go back to Dracula and Bram Stoker. I think that is the masterpiece of the genre.
Yeah. It's a silly question, I suppose, but did he write anything else?
Some short stories and a few other novels that didn't have anywhere near the impact. But that's why I named the house in Rosemary's Baby the Bramford, for Bram Stoker.
Never thought of that. Never thought of it. Anyone else have a particular favorite writer who's guaranteed to scare you, or did at an impressionable age?
I think if you read M.R. James at the right age, he can be very scary. He's a little stuffy for a modern taste. His language is a little old-fashioned. And there's always Lovecraft.
H.P. Lovecraft.
Lovecraft.
That's another one.
He's hard to read as an adult, I think. But,
The Lurking Fear and other stories. Yes, that got to me. But it's a special kind of weirdness that you either have to dig or not.
Really be ready for that, too. You have to be ready to sit down with that and sort of take that experience from those kinds of...
You have to take as much to Lovecraft, I think, as Lovecraft will bring to you. And if you can do that, you're pretty successful. I liked a guy named Richard Matheson. I think that he was the first guy that I ever read as a teenager who seemed to be doing something that Lovecraft wasn't doing. It wasn't Eastern Europe. It was like the horror could be in the 7-Eleven store down the block, or it could be, you know, just up the street. Something terrible could be going on, even in a GI Bill type ranch development near a college. That it could be there as well. And to me, as a kid, that was a revelation. That was extremely exciting. He was putting the horror in places that I could relate to.
Did he write I Am Legend?
Yeah, I Am Legend, and
I've always been told to read that, and I never.
And The Shrinking Man.
Extraordinary. And The Shrinking Man.
Yeah.
Sort of in that time, in that early 50s, was particularly in American.
Robert Bloch.
Yeah, but that's when we as Americans started to sort of blame ourselves for things.
Yeah.
And that's when the horror came home. It no longer was from Transylvania. It was, you know, I mean, once in a while it came from the outer reaches, but preyed on us. Because I'm speaking from an American perspective, but I think that was one of the, Matheson was one of the first people that was really...
Of course, one of the things that Matheson did that's got to be a classic is that story about the fellow who's just driving upstate in California and the truck gets on his tail. And you never see the driver, you never know exactly what his trip is, but he's trying to murder this fellow who was played in the movie by Dennis Weaver with an oil tanker truck. Very frightening. Spielberg, that wasn't that
Spielberg? That was Spielberg's
Yeah.
first film. It was that's the pure thing too. It's
really
right on target.
Duel. Is that Duel?
Duel. Yeah.
If a book is good, I almost never care where the author got the idea. It doesn't interest me. But in this case, I know that part of survival for you is coming up with ideas. To me, that would be the toughest part. It's a field that's been worked and worked. Do you mind telling where some of the ideas come from?
I've gotten most of mine from things I've read. Newspaper articles, nonfiction, books, something will spark.
Can you think of an example of where one of your...
Well, The Stepford Wives, I got the idea for that reading Future Shock, Alvin Toffler's book. There's a section in there on domestic robots, and he speculates on how well they will work. And I said, well, suppose they work very well.
That was all you needed.
Right. Then a couple of years to think about it.
Really, a couple of years of putting down ideas?
I find with me an idea has to stew for a long time.
And with The Shining, can you point to...
well, that was a case where I had half an idea that I got from reading Ray Bradbury. And I think from the Dark Carnival stories, and about a little boy. Bradbury's got a story called The Veldt, which is set in the future, and there's a nursery where the walls, your mind projects movies on these walls. And at the end of the story, the monsters inside the walls come alive and eat up the parents who go inside.
Lions and tigers.
Lions and tigers and bears, oh my. And it seemed to me that, okay, let's have a kid who can make things real. That was half of the idea. And then my wife and I we're in Colorado, and we went up to a hotel called the Stanley in Estes Park, and I said, this is the place. And when I had the place to go with the, you know, the idea of the little boy, everything came together. And really, I'd had half of that idea just sort of kicking around inside for maybe 2 years or something, not knowing exactly where the drive shaft was for that.
That's something I've found, and I think it probably applies to all writers, not just in this genre, but every really good idea is the coming together of two half ideas, sort of. Suddenly you realize that you've been thinking about Project A and Project M, and if you put those two together, suddenly there's a spark.
And sometimes I think you don't quite realize how parasitic it is to work, particularly in a genre like this, because the things that made impressions on you that you read or that you saw are in very often impressions that are really deeply in there somewhere. And I know I find, particularly with the filmic style, that I very often catch myself being parasitic of some. You mentioned the moment with the mirror in the Polanski film. You know, those things lay in the back of your head, and you walk on the set and you see something and you decide, well, how about I light it this way and shoot it this way? And you realize then all of a sudden, oh, I've seen this before.
Don't you think too, George, that it's a really narrow sort of field, and you can't help but step on other people's feet or go over what other people have done? Don't you think that's true?
I think it is, yeah. Well, I Am Legend really is what, and I wrote Night of the Living Dead because I read I Am Legend, I think, and I just wanted to, I know I wanted to just lay a little more socio-political stuff into that and make it very frontal and overt, because rather than just a pure terror piece. And I know that somewhere in the back of my mind it came from that, from having read that and saying, wait, that's not exactly, you know, this is more like what it should be. You know, and it comes from a kind of a conviction, I think, of knowing that, well, I can accomplish one of two things. I can be scary in this way, and I can tell that story, which is what you were saying before. Once you have the guidelines, you can your tendency is to tell the story in a streamlined way, because you don't ramble as much. You keep bringing it back to that, whatever it is that's going to target, hopefully, the audience in onto something that's going to be frightening.
Do you believe in any of these things? Do you believe the people who have seen weird things happen? Do you believe in, is it called telekinesis or telekinesis? The person who can clear a bookshelf of books by his mind, or cause the ashtray to leap from the table.
Cause the prom.
Yeah, I don't believe or disbelieve. I've always thought that there is such a body of evidence now from people who have no good cause to lie that almost surely, I say almost surely, things of that nature do go on from time to time, but I don't think that anybody has any real control over it. But until I actually see something myself, I got to say I'm just sort of an agnostic that leans toward a certain amount of belief.
On the other hand, Steve, haven't you had people come up to you and tell you about ghosts they have seen? Yeah. And they're not liars, and they seem perfectly reasonable, rational people.
That's right.
And you think, if this guy has seen it, you know, there is something there.
That's right.
Something, in fact, has happened.
Yeah. And they don't want anything, do they?
They don't want anything. Yeah.
What they want to do is tell you, because they think that you're a kindred spirit.
Yeah.
You suppose this is a real fly? Or Vincent Price?
So we know we have a spider here.
Now we have a small... Yes, I don't like to contribute to the fear of spiders because most of them are our friends, and someone threw that up here. But that fly is very...
Fly is quite interesting.
It's avoiding the spider.
It knows something.